I like Steve Turley and what he talks about. Antifa ringleader and Black Lives Matter activists are arrested as Trump begins to push back through some of this stuff. It's about time.
Conservative age. Also, we have a major announcement like yesterday. We're excited to announce the launch of our brand new Turley Talks podcast. Now, this is in response to the number of requests that we've gotten from you, particularly you podcast listeners who've wanted these videos in podcast form, and now you've got it. Your wish is our command. Now you can listen anywhere and at any time with your special podcast editions of Turley Talks. And we've got a super awesome giveaway to celebrate the launch of the podcast, all right? If you click on the link below and download your new podcast by July 8th, you'll be entered in to win one of my book bundles, and you'll get a free Turley Talks Insiders Club membership for an entire year, all right? So don't wait. Click on that link below and enjoy our brand new podcast specials and enter in our free giveaways today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. Strap yourselves in. The restoration of law and order in our nation has indeed begun. So let me set the stage here a bit for us to give us a context of what's going on here. I think it's important. The infuriating frustration that we've all been experiencing over the last several weeks stems from the fact that we really are in unprecedented times. So what's happening right now, in many respects, is really uncharted territory. So we have mass looting and violence, right? We have mass desecrations, destructions of our monuments and statues. But for the very first time, we have governors and mayors, all Democrats. For the very first time, the leaders in our nation's cities and in blue states aren't doing anything about it. In fact, they've taken side with the destroyers. Our supposed lawmakers, have allied themselves with lawbreakers. And in the process, they've thrown law enforcement under the bus. And so President Trump, because we live in a federal system of delegated jurisdiction, right, where governors and mayors and local officials are the ones entrusted with maintaining social order at their respective local levels, because we live in such a federal jurisdictional system, as we're finding out, mayors and governors can in fact voluntarily and deliberately abdicate their enforcement authority, their authority to enforce the law, and turn their cities over to a bunch of armed lawless thugs. And there's very little that a president of the United States can actually do about it, just from a purely jurisdictional perspective. Now, this is precisely what happened in Seattle with the so-called Chaz autonomous fiasco. The mayor of Seattle, the left-wing lunatic mayor there, she deliberately abdicated her authority to call in law enforcement and overthrow the insurrection immediately. And as a result, 2 people are dead. Now, did you see the heart-wrenching interview that Sean Hannity had with the father of one of the latest victim, the teenage boy, who's the second murder victim in that ridiculous hippie haven? What he said was so true, was so heart-wrenching. He said it just through tears. He was like, these were freaking kids. These people who set up Chaz, they were kids. They were dumb kids. And they needed to be stopped. The city had a responsibility to intervene, to be the adults and stop this childish nonsense. But keep in mind, things are so insane in the Democrat-run Seattle. Things are so absurd that the lunatic left-run city council actually threatened the mayor with impeachment if she didn't side with the protesters. They had the goal of threatening the mayor with impeachment if she didn't side with the lawless and the looters and the rioters. How's that for collective insanity? I said it the other day. I think I'm beginning to have second thoughts about CHOP or Chaz. Maybe CHOP was an improvement over the left-wing nuts that run Seattle. Maybe a warlord isn't too far off from what Seattle already has with their left-wing lunatics running the show. We live in a federalist system where enforcement authorities delegate in a pyramid-like structure where governors and mayors have the jurisdictional responsibility for civil order in their respective states, their local jurisdictions. And the frustration that we've all been experiencing is this completely unprecedented move by left-wing lunatic mayors and governors.
I tell you what is not talked about enough is people are moving out of these areas, taking their businesses and their money out of this area. They're taking their families out of this area. And they say, you can have it. And they're moving to red cities and red states and more conservative groups. And they're moving out of the cities, populated cities, into more rural areas. Think about that. Think about that. There is consequences of this. And truckers will not get into these areas. I don't blame them. They won't get their supplies, and they won't get stuff delivered. So there are big consequences coming from these things. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg as this craziness continues.
In their deliberate and purposeful abdication of their enforcement authority and deliberately allowing chaos to reign throughout our nation's cities. And again, make no mistake, there's only one reason in the end they're doing this, I think, and that's solely to try to make Trump lose re-election. If Trump were not president, say if Obama were president, like he was during the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore, the Michael Brown riots in Ferguson, the left-wing mayors, well, they of course would still be completely and totally incompetent and fail to stop it, but they at least would be apologizing for it. Or like the Baltimore mayor who refused to run for re-election as she allowed the city to implode, to be so devastated by their riots. So Trump is in a precarious situation. He has these left-wing lunatic mayors and governors basically engage in a collective mutiny against him. They refuse to enforce the law. They refuse to call up the National Guard. And then we find out that the leadership of the military has been so neutered by political correctness that they don't want to get deployed throughout the nation's cities. So what's Trump supposed to do? Well, now we're beginning to see Trump's strategy in response to all this collective insanity. It's pretty impressive. First, President Trump, of course, signed an executive order which mandates maximum prison sentences of 10 years for those convicted of attempting to desecrate or destroy national monuments while withholding funds from local governments that fail to protect their own statutes. Secondly, Trump is going through the Department of Homeland Security, and together they set up a task force to prevent the destruction and vandalism of statues and monuments commemorating the heritage and history of the United States. And what Trump is doing is he's working with the Justice Department to deploy FBI agents throughout the nation. And as a result, we're beginning to see mass arrests across the nation that are striking at the heart of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Now, this is happening at the same time that President Trump has begun to actually tone down his rhetoric. This is something that scholars like Victor Davis Hanson has argued Trump needs to do, and I think they're right. He needs to speak softly and reassuringly while carrying a massive stick. And this is in contrast to how he first appeared, where he was speaking quite loudly but with a little twig because the leftist lunatic mayors and governors refused to enforce the law and tried to embarrass him. And so the Secretary of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, announced that the task force was working together with the Justice Department to begin the process of national defense, defending our national monuments.
Now, this is important that he toned down the rhetoric, but it's also important that he gets serious about uniting federal forces in getting after these people and arresting them. So hopefully this will help clear out and show his leadership again.
And we should expect a massive surge in arrests. And that is precisely what we're seeing. On Wednesday, the Justice Department announced that they had arrested 4 men suspected in a failed vandalism attempt targeting the President Andrew Jackson statues in D.C.'s Lafayette Square. Next, it was just announced yesterday that federal prosecutors have arrested what they are calling the ringleader of, or a ringleader of Antifa, who was involved in trying to pull down the Andrew Jackson statue outside the White House last month. Next, we're seeing Black Lives Matter thugs getting arrested. A Utah man by the name of Jesse Taggart was arrested and charged with attempted aggravated murder, aggravated assault, and rioting. Taggart is a fanatic whose Facebook page is littered with pro-BLM propaganda. In Des Moines, Iowa, law enforcement officers began arresting BLM demonstrators on the state capitol grounds the other day. Police used pepper spray to disperse the crowd, which was indeed successfully disbanded. Moreover, it's also being reported that federal investigators are even going on Facebook and arresting people for inciting riots on social media. And finally, the Department of Homeland Security is deploying special federal units to protect monuments over the July 4th weekend, particularly in Portland, Seattle, and in Washington, D.C. And all of this shows that President Trump has begun to use the full force of federal law to effectively crush this left-wing lunacy that's been unleashed throughout our nation. And in so doing, he is restoring law and order and setting himself up for a huge landslide victory in November. Now, before you go,
All right, so hopefully this will be effective. This will help a huge landslide victory. I cannot picture Biden in there. If he gets in there, we've had massive voting fraud. The mailing voting fraud needs to be stopped in California, New York, and other states. And I hope it is stopped before these next 4 years up. If Trump is reelected, I assume that he will be. Time will tell. Good day. And we need also to get his son in there, Trump Jr., and get him in for 8 years as the next president following Trump. That would be wonderful. He's even better outspoken than Trump is. He's being on many things for his father. He needs to get into infrastructure this year. Trump needs to understand that that's an essential thing so we can get another great leader in for another 8 years, because we're going to need it as we battle such great wickedness on the left and the late, massive, abusive DC power that exists in the federal bureaucracy. Good day.